Evening, everyone, and welcome to the second annual Kinder Leeds Festival, our Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing. I'm really delighted to be with you here tonight. We have got a fantastic week of events lined up, over 50 events, everything from mindful hand stitching to the Leeds Climate Assembly launch to a deaf cafe. We've got something for everyone. And I'd especially like to invite you, if you are local to Leeds, please do come to our live event on Tuesday, the Kindness Exchange, KindX. We've got a brilliant group of inspiring speakers, almost all local speakers there, and lots of other interesting things. So we're very excited about this year's festival. We think it is going to be really special. And we have a very special event for you this evening. Absolutely delighted to have with us Dr. Shaid Mahmood from the City Council, now Chief Officer for Transformation and Change. I'll introduce him in a moment. And also Thupten Jinpa, who is, many of you will know as a world-renowned figure in many respects, translator to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, founder and president of Compassion Institute, and author of a number of important books of Buddhist scholarship, and also the recent book, Fearless Heart, how compassion is the key to greater well-being, which has inspired me very much. So we're thrilled to have both of those people with us this evening. Shaid Mahmood has been working with us and supporting us from almost the very beginning of our journey. Now three and a half years we've been working to create this Festival of Compassion. And when we started, we actually didn't realize that the City of Leeds had already adopted the slogan Compassionate City and had its own Compassionate City program. So we were pretty interested to discover that. And we've worked hand in hand with the City Council and with many other wonderful partners as well since the early days. And Shaid was the host for the city's Compassionate City Awards, which we've attended and supported. And there's a really wonderful way that the city is honoring all kinds of people, often people who have had very little recognition for the amazing work they've been doing in the city. So there's a really interesting partnership, we think, between the voluntary and community sector here and all of the dedicated work that many community groups, which we include ourselves, have been doing, and the City Council has, really embraced that and worked together with us and with many other groups. So I'm very happy indeed to introduce Shaid Mahmood, who's become a good friend, when we first got to know him, he was part of the communities team, but recently appointed this very interesting new post of Chief Officer for Transformation and Change. And to me, that symbolizes, that the city is really seeing compassion as one of the, as a really strategic, important element in this city's strategy to flourish and thrive in the face of all the multiple challenges that we're facing with the pandemic, with the economic situation that we're facing, with the challenge of climate change, probably the biggest challenge of all. And we have, included a few events in our festival here. I just mentioned that the Leeds Climate Assembly, the first Leeds Climate Assembly, is actually launching tomorrow. And the launch of that event is on our program, and also the event on Thursday, the Meet the Movement event they've organized. But there's a whole week of very important events there as well, if that's your major interest. So, you know, we kind of got our philosophy last year from the keynote speech given by Satish Kumar, who basically said, we need compassion for ourselves, we need compassion for each other, compassion in society, and we need compassion for the planet. And that's our kind of theme for this year, is kinder to ourselves, kinder to each other, kinder to the planet. So yeah, before I introduce Shaid, just like to say, we are seeing ourselves, and we are, I think, one of a worldwide sort of constellation of compassionate cities. There is an international network as part of the Charter for Compassion, over 400 compassionate cities around the world. So I think this is an idea that is gaining traction, gaining ground, and we'll hear more about it from our two speakers tonight. But I think, you know, this is, of course, it's very nice to have a festival of kindness and compassion, but it's more than just a nice thing. It could be really the key to how we survive and flourish well in the 21st century. So I'd just like to begin, Shaid, by asking you, in your view, you know, what makes a compassionate city? What is a compassionate city, and why are they important in your view?
Hi, David. Thanks so much for inviting me, and particularly for inviting Leeds City Council to take part in this kick-off event. And for me, it's a compassionate cities is one which really where individuals care about others. I think at its brutest and most cut down form. And that's incredibly important, isn't it? I think it's always been important that we were kind to each other and demonstrated compassionate action in the way that we work with other people. And by work, I don't mean professional work, but in the way that we live our lives in and around each other and with other people. I think it's always been fundamental to that. But I think certainly in the last 18 months, we've had an outpouring of compassion in the city of Leeds, and I'm sure in many other places as well. And I might touch on that as part of the contribution you've asked me to make in this opening session. But for me, it's about a city where every individual cares about other individuals that are around them, and that its most basic form for me. That's where it all stems from.
Right. Yeah, and I think you know, we can all recognize that, we can all agree to that. But what about, do you see it as something more than just people being kind to each other individually? What I'm getting at is, you know, there is a sense for me that this has become something that's really entering the conversation about policy and about structural change in society. And I'm sensing that Leeds City Council is recognizing that, and that's, you know, part of the reason why they've actually chosen you, appointed you in this role as the person that's actually looking at how do we change our city, how do we change society at this point in time? And really I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that aspect of it.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, but I wouldn't want to make it just about me and my role. I have a role, and as part of that, there's a number of different streams of consciousness and philosophy that kind of enable us and are part of the way that we go about developing strategy in the city and how we then deliver it. And I'll move into my contribution in that vein, because it can't be just about any one individual. I think that's really important. I'm a part player in all of this. I work with a fantastic leadership team in the City Council, but also certainly in the last 18 months with fantastic leaders in other organisations and people who are leaders but don't have an organisation who've made that kind of equivalency in terms of their impact, and they play a part in that. So you know, I think it's really important to recognise that actually what we've tried to do as a city is to have the kind of broadest church of people involved, engaged, and actively contributing to being a more compassionate society in the city, and for making sure that we are challenged as a city council to make sure that our city plan that we develop is a proper city plan that's developed and owned by others, and that compassionate action and the compassionate approaches and compassionate leadership very much sits at the heart of that. But David, you'll remember that I'm here because of the development process that you started with our deputy leader, Councillor Deborah Cooper, who, as you know, has recently changed portfolios, but asked me to take this work forward in collaboration with you. And by the way, she sends her regards and the best wishes for the festival. But I also know, David, that you've met with our new cabinet member for communities, Councillor Mary Harland, as well. And she's also asked that I convey my best wishes for a successful festival to you and everyone on the call tonight. And in doing so, has asked me to represent the council at this particular event. I know you've been around long enough to know that we aspire in the city to be the best city in the UK. And I know last year you had the leader of the council, Judith, now Baroness Blake, contributing to this event. And she will undoubtedly have talked to you about the brilliant work that has been going on over a number of years right across the city to tackle poverty and reduce inequality, but also the work that we're doing in the city to ensure that Leeds, as the third largest city in the UK, is doing more and becoming more inclusive in the way that its economies grow. So to your point about, well, how do we take that compassionate approach and think about how we seam it into the way that we go about developing strategy and doing things in the city. I think that is really important, that we become more inclusive in the way that our economy grows, how we ensure, for example, that health and well-being for all of our communities is improved, and that we've got an infrastructure in the city that's not just functional in the way that it supports the city, but that it's also sustainable, and that we recognise that, you know, we've got significant challenges for some children and young people and for some of our older population, and that we become more child and age friendly as a city, that we provide housing that is of a good standard and that provides for a sense of stability for the citizens of Leeds, where they can achieve successful outcomes for themselves and for their families and for their neighbourhoods. And I suppose it's also really important that the City Council and other city actors work with and alongside communities to develop safer and stronger communities, and we celebrate the kind of diversity of the city, you know, the number of languages that we speak and the number of traditions that are represented in a city of the size and depth of Leeds, and all of that then is reflected and should be reflected in the city's culture as we head towards Culture 2023, a big celebration of culture in the city. It's also probably remiss of me if I don't mention, in the light of the Conference of Parties, the COP26 that's going to take place in Glasgow at the end of October and the beginning of November, that we've got a stated aim in Leeds that we want to be zero carbon in Leeds by 2030. And we've just bought the largest local government electric fleet in the United Kingdom and organised a tree planting scheme with other schemes being developed and on the way. I'd also want to reflect really on, you know, we've had 10 years of reducing public sector budgets in the country, and the City Council has been clearly impacted by them. We're a smaller organisation than we were a decade ago. And what that's done is it produces and places additional pressure on the council's ability to meet the needs of the citizens of Leeds. And councils have always been the safety net of last resort for people in vulnerable circumstances. And many people don't actually realise that we don't just repair street lights and clean streets and empty bins, that the majority of the revenue budget of a council is spent on safeguarding and protecting the vulnerable. And I think that's really important to recognise in the leadership role that the council has in the city, because the pandemic has really seen the council step up to the mark hugely, and not just our council, many councils, and respond to the needs of their local communities in quite dire circumstances. and they've worked with other city actors in I think, a most remarkable way that recognises the strength and the content of the different contributions that people as individuals, but also as organisations, can make. And that partnership approach is something that seems much of what we do right the way through the city in Leeds. And it isn't the sole domain. I think partnership working isn't new, and many other cities do it, but it does cost. Real partnership working costs in time and energy. And if you don't have compassion hardwired into a common purpose and a collective endeavour, that then becomes much more difficult to deliver. And I think in Leeds, I would say that we do it particularly well, but it's built on years of dedicated hard work on many people over the last couple of decades and before my time in the council. So I just want to make sure that we kind of recognise that you kind of walk in the footsteps of giants, don't you, when it comes to this sort of work, and that's important to make sure we mark. As I said earlier on, I think we saw compassion in action during the pandemic, with thousands of volunteers in the city working with local authorities, with public sector partners, and also with local third sector organisations and faith organisations in the city to support the citizens of Leeds in very difficult circumstances. Within 2 days of lockdown on March the 23rd, the City Council was getting phone calls and people knocking on its civic buildings, wanting help and support, and in very dire circumstances, not having enough money. They weren't sure if they can go to an ATM to draw anything out. Where would they be able to buy food? What about the prescriptions? How were they going to be secured and delivered to home addresses? So we energised a huge activity in the city around provision of food and medicines and companionship. We helped the homeless to become more sheltered from our streets and for the children to be fed. But I think it's also important to give a shout out to the many citizens of Leeds, many of whom, without prompting, self-organised, and we're just brilliant neighbours, really demonstrating compassionate action with their friends and family members and people who lived across the road from them, really supporting those in their local community. And that was just self-organised, nothing to do with the city council. People just being kind to each other and thinking, we're in the same boat together. How can I help someone in my neighbourhood that can strengthen our relationships as a consequence? So I think there's probably even more need now for councils to be enabling and empowering with partners and wider city actors, working with and alongside local communities, and really deliver the vision and the strategy in the new city plan that we're developing. And it is our view that a compassionate approach underpinned by compassionate leadership is central to that delivery. And I'm sure Jinpa will want to say more about that in his contribution later on, but we have in Leeds for some time, as you alluded to, celebrated the people and the organisations that make a positive impact through our Compassionate City Awards, which has been going for 4 years now. And that's, it's the ordinary folk of Leeds who every day give of their best and demonstrate compassionate action through their everyday deeds. And as I said earlier on, if a compassionate city for me is one in which people really care about each other, and the awards are there to inspire individuals to act compassionately towards their peers. And David, if you could see from the stage, as you mentioned earlier on, IMC that event, and if you could see from the stage what I see, with people who may never have been in the civic hall, and the emotions on their faces when they arrive at the building and then they're greeted through the large gates and make their way up through the magnificent staircase and past the many ornaments of civic pride that we have, and then they walk into the banqueting suite. And we always choose December as the time that we have these awards because it's close to Christmas festivities. So the Millennium Square outside banqueting suite is glowing with decorations, and we decorate the inside as well. And many of the people who've never been in the civic hall before, and then we kind of read the citations out, and the citations are read out and the names are read out by our city politicians and the award sponsors. And I've got to tell you, I defy anyone to have a dry eye after witnessing that. Really, I think that's probably a good place. I can suck the air out of a room if I'm not careful, and I can go on a while. So I do need to hand back to you. But I think so. This is probably a good place to stop my contribution, David, and hand back to you. But just finally, before I do want to say that we have, as a city, worked really hard together to try and hardwire a compassionate approach to the way that we do things in Leeds. And I'm not saying we get it right all the time. Well, I'll tell you, we don't always get it right. I'd like to think we get it more right than we get it wrong. But what we do is we listen, and when we get it wrong, we try and put it right. And the pandemic's really broadened and deepened health and financial and social inequalities in our city, and the challenges of recovering from it and becoming more resilient as a city means that we should continue with a compassionate approach to the delivery of our city ambitions. In fact, I think people demand it. I'll hand back to you, Dim.
Thank you very much, Shaid. That's that's a vision that really touches my heart, and that is, it's very easy to be cynical about a city council, and it goes with the territory. I'm sure you will agree that people are going to be cynical, and they're going to point out where you're not managing to deliver, and under the present circumstances, incredibly hard. I think it's been really, to be honest, very ruthless the way that government has actually undermined the power of local governments and local councils to, deliver for those needs that people have. And I find it very sad. And I think that Leeds has, shown great courage and determination. And we feel very happy to be partnering with the City Council. I hope nobody thinks that we are, some kind of surrogate for the council, that we are not. We don't receive any money from the council. We are an independent voluntary group. So this is genuine support that we feel. We believe that it's authentic. And it's very hard in the position that you're in to maintain that authenticity. And I feel, very happy to be a citizen of Leeds with that kind of. I think that the City Council is showing leadership as a city, and not just the council. It's also, as you pointed out, as you spoke about, that very real and dynamic partnership with this vast array of voluntary and community groups that we have in the city. We have some amazing ones, and many of them are featured in our festival this week, so you'll have a chance to see some of the work that they're doing. So thank you. And I think there's tremendous potential in that vision that you've outlined, and I think that we've got a very exciting meeting of minds happening here, because we had, of course, wanted to introduce Shaid and Jinpa to each other, so we had them on a Zoom call last week, and I thought they were really clicking with each other. I think they both thought the same thing. So and it's very exciting for me, because Thupten Jinpa, it's one of my personal heroes. I mean, I've known him for 25 years, actually. And when I first knew him, he just recently come into lay clothes, having been a monk for almost all his life. And so it was really, he was studying philosophy at Cambridge at the time, which is interesting that we've managed to remain friends, because I studied philosophy at Oxford, which puts us on opposite sides of a divide there. But anyway, as the translator to the Dalai Lama, I've experienced his amazing gifts as a translator. He's been able to render in a very extremely different language. Tibetan is very different from English, and the fluency with which he's able to translate the deep thinking of the Dalai Lama has been a huge gift to the world, really, because, I think I speak for many people when I say Dalai Lama is one of the most significant thinkers and spiritual leaders on the planet. So that's, I guess, what Jinpa is best known as His Holiness's translator. For many years, he's been rendering that service, translated many of his books and many of his teachings. But in, I think, 2009, he was invited as a visiting scholar to Stanford University. They have a research center there on compassion. And during that period there, he developed a training program, which is a very interesting program. And I will be speaking about that tomorrow night for those that are interested. I'm doing a webinar tomorrow evening. You'll find it on the program about compassion training. So this is compassion cultivation training. And it's based on the traditional wisdom of the Tibetan Buddhist path, but with the religious elements taken out. And the Dalai Lama is very keen on the fact that not only within Buddhism, but within many of the great religious, spiritual traditions of the world, there is a secular philosophy and ethics and an understanding of the mind and the spirit that is universal, that everyone can relate to and everyone can benefit from. So I think it was a brilliant piece of work that Jinpa and his colleagues at Stanford took the essence of those ancient traditional teachings and not only translated them into a secular form, but also provided scientific research backing for the way in which the program works. So this program has been scientifically validated. It produces very significant improvements in individual well-being, and it's becoming very popular around the world. And I'm hoping to introduce it to Leeds. Well, I am introducing it to Leeds, hoping to set up a center there for this type of training. So we've been in communication about this for about 3 years now. And I'm really delighted to have him with me tonight to speak about that. But it goes beyond the CCT Compassion Cultivation Training Program itself, because now the Compassion Institute, which Jinpa has established, is developing professional programs for people in all the public services, in the health service, education service, police. And this is relating to a concept that I think has come from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but also very significantly Jinpa's own thinking has contributed to it, as you'll find in his book, Fearless Heart, which I mentioned before, which I highly recommend. That, it's not enough really to just for that individuals can benefit, and that's great, and that benefits society, but we also need to look at the institutions of society, how they function and how they're structured, and can we bring compassion into those public institutions, because that seems that will be necessary to create a truly compassionate society. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity here to hear your thoughts on that, Jinpa. But before you do that, may I, as has been suggested, ask you to lead us in a short meditative practice to just tune our minds into the right space to receive that message.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, David. So before I lead the practice, I would like to express my deep appreciation. And also, I feel both honored and also happy to be participating in this year's Kinder Leeds Festival and to be asked to speak and also share a platform with Dr. Shaid Mahmood, who has shared with us real experience of what it means to try to bring the principles of compassion and approach into concrete reality of everyday citizen in a major metropolitan city. So before I make my formal comments about compassion as asked, I would like to invite you all to join me in a very brief reflective practice. So for this, please find a comfortable posture so that you can feel rested and grounded. And if you're not familiar with basic meditation practice, an easy way to do that is to if you're sitting on a chair, feel your feet touching the ground and place your hands on your knees and just notice the points of contact, whether it is your feet touching the ground or your hands resting on your knees, and just try to slow down your body, including even your breathing, just taking deeper breaths And as if noticing for the first time, you can just notice your body and rest your attention just on that awareness of your body. And just feel the energy of your body and mind slowing down, as if it's settling down. See if you can feel that energy of quiet resting, as if there is a silence inside you. Now, with our mind and body relatively settled, I'd like to invite you all to connect with that passion or aspiration that brought us all together here today to meet in this virtual room. Our shared aspiration to see more compassion in the world, to see kindness playing a more active role, both in our own lives, but in the lives of others, and more importantly, in society, in broader society. Let's connect with that energy in us that aspires for that vision. Let's acknowledge that this is an important part of who I am and who we are. And rejoice in its presence in our heart. Okay, now, when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Thank you. I've been a big admirer of the Compassionate Cities movement that began, more than a decade ago by Charter for Compassion, which was founded by the British author and religious historian Karen Armstrong. And in Dr. Mahmood's, remarks, it became very clear that for Leeds, at least, it's not just a rhetoric. It is there is quite a lot of substance behind the idea of a compassionate city, including the awarding of the Compassionate Awards, Leeds Compassionate Awards, and so on. And so for me to have this opportunity to be part of this year's Leeds Compassion Festival is a real honor. I remember fondly my last visit to Leeds when I had the privilege to accompany His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I'm a big admirer of your beautiful city. Dr. Mahmood talked about the ambition for Leeds becoming the best city in the UK. Why not the best city in the world? There is a real potential. So the theme of my talk is really transforming society through compassion. Now, when we think about this important sort of matter of how do we transform society through compassion, I would like to ask you to imagine the following. Imagine there is an arrow pointing upwards from the bottom. And then there is another arrow pointing from top below, pointing towards the downwards. And then imagine on the two sides, arrows pointing towards the middle. So you have basically four arrows, one from on the top, one from bottom, and two from the two sides. And at the center, let's put the word compassionate society. So basically, the arrow on the bottom pointing upwards is really the individuals. You can call it the individual domain, the domain, how do we bring compassion at the individual personal level? The two arrows on the side is more like a horizontal, approach, which you can represent all the key sectors, such as healthcare, education, law enforcement, caring for the elderly, workplace culture. So all of these are in the middle. So they are more like kind of a key institutions whose behavior has direct impact on the everyday lives of everybody, the citizens. So they are the key sectors that make up the society. And the arrow is pointing to the middle. Then imagine the arrow on the top, which is pointing downwards. So that's the leadership, the policies, the systems of, the structures of society, societal values, and societal culture. So if we are serious about transforming society through compassion, we need a kind of a multi-pronged, comprehensive approach, which would involve bringing compassion both horizontally in the key sectors, but also bottom up from the level of the individuals caring for each other, having a regard for other people's needs and so on. And then also we need to find a way to institute compassionate approach and compassionate leadership at this higher level, which transcends individual countries or even cities or countries. So here we're talking about shared values, shared culture, societal culture, policies, most importantly. So now on the transformative power of compassion on the individual level, today we know quite a lot actually. There's been a huge advances in the science of compassion, and the science of compassion combined with the science of human well-being. There's a lot of knowledge now about how compassion is intimately connected to sense of well-being. Compassion, because of its emphasis on relationality, how it buffers against potential problem of loneliness in old age, and how compassion, in fact, when someone is able to truly act out of genuine kindness to another person, even the individual experiences a sense of high called helper's high. There's literally a kind of a chemical activation in the brain, which is similar to which is part of the reward system. So there's the helper's high. So clearly, there's a lot of research that shows that when you act in a compassionate way, not only is it good for the recipient of your kind act, but also for yourself, who is the source of kindness. There is a joy. And most importantly, when someone embraces compassion, because compassion is primarily focused on the need of another person, someone other than yourself, it gives you a sense of purpose. And we all know there is nothing more meaningful than to be able to make a difference in someone's life in a positive way, when you're truly able to help someone. So compassion gives you a powerful sense of purpose. And I remember many, many years ago, when His Holiness was visiting Japan once, there was a huge social problem of teenage suicide, and quite widespread. And His Holiness was asked, what's the best remedy against this? He says, create opportunities for the young students to spend some time doing voluntary work, especially in the underdeveloped parts of the world where they can really feel they can make a difference. Now, that captures powerfully a very important insight about the compassion's power to foster a sense of purpose. And we now know if you look at tons and tons of, happiness studies, scientific studies, two key factors that are central for longevity and well-being are sense of purpose and social connection. I don't want to go into the science, but there's quite a lot of studies showing that these are two key indicators of a genuinely happy life. And compassion is the best way to promote them. And now we also know compassion paradoxically, because compassion asks us to pay attention to someone else's problem in addition to our own, a common sense would say, why do I need to take on an additional suffering when I have my own problem? But paradoxically, by paying attention to someone's problem, by being interested in someone's problem, somehow creates a greater resilience in our mind. And there's, for example, a recent study that was done in Denmark on compassion cultivation training, which David mentioned, and which I had the privilege to develop at Stanford, which is now disseminated through Compassion Institute. There was a randomized control study done on caregivers who are looking after mentally ill family members on a sustained long-term basis. And strikingly, the result was that after going through this 6-week program, they were tested at the beginning, after the program, and 6 months later. And those who took the course, as opposed to the randomized control groups, scored quite high on the reduction of the key indicators of depression and anxiety. So there is something about compassion's capacity to create greater resilience in us. And in a simple way, one could say that compassion is a very natural human quality. And quite often we make the mistake of suppressing it because we can't deal with the problem. We feel overwhelmed and we suppress it. And that kind of suppressive approach is in fact turning out to be one of the sources of our own problem. And there is a research now that shows that, for example, in the healthcare context, in order to protect oneself, if one adopts the approach of suppression, like depersonalization is the technical word that is used, instead of relating to the patient as a human being, you turn the patient into a number, a patient in room 5 or patient in room 3. And there's a way of depersonalizing the patient. That kind of depersonalization in the long run becomes another factor for burnout. So we now have quite a lot of understanding of how compassion is key for personal well-being, resilience, and sense of purpose, and so on. We also know compassion is very natural. This is one of the reasons why it's no surprise that compassion turned out to be the fundamental value across all the major religious traditions of the world. It's one shared universal value. So we know it's a natural, and also we humans, across all societies, we admire compassion, we elevate it, we admire it. So compassion is powerful, it is natural. We also know now, thanks to compassion training, standardized training programs like the CCT, that compassion is a skill as well, that we can, even though we don't have to learn it anew, but through training, we can make it a more active force. We can make it more intentional. We can make, some of the skills of compassion more conscious so that we can tap into that part of who we are, especially when we are confronting a difficult and challenging situation. We can choose to tap into the compassionate part of us rather than fear, judgment, and suspicion, and so on. The period of choice may be very small before our reactivity kicks in, but in principle, there's that space. And through intention, through cultivation of intention, through cultivation of a habit, we can learn to bring our better part, better self in a situation. And this matters a lot. We know that, for example, even in the parenting style, if we are able to bring more compassion, less self-focus, or as parents, worrying too much about respect to me as a parent from the child. Whereas if our focus is more about the child's needs, the child's safety, child's situation, the relationship quality completely changes. The behavior, the actual action may be the same, but where it is coming from makes all the difference. And children feel it. Same goes for school teachers. Same goes for healthcare providers. Compassion is something that we can't fake. You feel it. Because we are such social creatures, and we are so used to reading body behavior, tone of language, tone of the voice, that compassion But when it shows up and when we choose to bring it, it's powerful. So we now know at the individual level, we do know quite a bit about how to bring compassion and how to tap into the potential power of compassion and how to make individuals, more compassionate. And in the end, as the Dalai Lama says that, when you choose to embrace compassion, the first beneficiary is really yourself. Whether your compassion actually brings material benefit to the other person in front of you depends on other factors. Sometimes the person in front of you may not be ready to respond to your gesture, but you have experienced the opening of your heart. So we know from our own personal experience, when we choose compassion, the power is palpable. So at the individual level, seems to be, whether or not everybody will be able to join in is another matter, but at least how to go about doing it seems to be, we're getting better and better at it. And the Compassion Institute has, over several hundred certified instructors who have gone through the 9-month training. So it's internationally, there are some in the UK. David is one of the certified instructors. We have Emily Oliver in London, who's a senior CCT educator. So there are quite a lot, and more individuals will join this movement. So the individual level, I think it's an ongoing initiative and efforts. Now, the second domain, which is the key sectors, these are the institutions whose everyday behavior impacts us on a regular basis. So healthcare is a very important one. And during this current global pandemic, the need for compassion in healthcare has shown to be very, very important and powerful. And not just from the healthcare providers and officials, but also on the part of the patients and the citizens too, to have compassion for the healthcare providers who had to sacrifice so much. And sometimes, when our own family members is struggling and can't get the treatment in the right time, can't get the right place, we feel frustrated. We express our frustration towards the healthcare providers. So there's a lot of, the charged environment, creates sort of, a situation of frustration where we forget that everybody is trying their best. So in this current situation, I think we need, much more explicit focus on how do we actively bring compassion into the healthcare context. And now there is quite a lot of research on the power of compassion to prevent early onslaughts of burnout in healthcare providers whose nature of their job is such that they are constantly exposed to acute suffering. So here, the Compassion Institute has developed a 6-week protocol called Caring from the Inside Out. There are others. So I think that, what it does is it teaches important skills of emotion regulation, bringing awareness to your emotion, tapping into your intention and connecting with your intention so that you for example, like taking a breath so that between 2 patients to the next patient, you can show up afresh so that you don't bring any of that negative exchange that might have happened as a spillover. So there are skills like this which can be brought in. Education, of course, is a very important sector. This is one area where His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has made a lot of effort. He believes that if we are serious about changing society, we need to start at the level of education of children. Children need to learn more about the importance of cultivating empathy and compassion, acceptance of differences, being totally at home with the plurality of cultures, languages, and ethnicity, and all of this. So school is one area, and also teacher education is another important area. So, and then law enforcement is another important area where compassion can really play a key role, because even though in some countries, the law enforcement officers almost look like military personnel, but the basic principle is that the law enforcement officers are there to serve. They are in the service of community. And this is one area where UK has an advantage, because UK, the police culture of this community spirit has remained very strong. So again, this is an important, sector. So there are many sectors where we need to find a way to bring compassion. And then when we bring compassion into these key sectors, not only the members of these key professions are able to really serve in an effective way, and also it gives them, when they are able to serve in an effective way, and when their service is recognized and acknowledged, they feel a sense of purpose and joy too. They're also human beings like us. Everybody needs recognition. So I think, it gives them and also through compassionate approach, it allows people in the service profession to be able to connect with their original intention. Why did they join these, communities, professions? Because they want to serve. And then in the process, after a long period, people lose touch with the original motive, original intent, the spark that brought them there. So bringing compassion in a more explicit way can really help. And then, of course, if they're able to bring compassion as part of their ethos and culture and perspective and intention in serving, clearly the citizens will be the great beneficiaries, because it will immediately translate in a different style of doing their professional work. The actual work themselves may be the same. It's the way in which they are done. If you bring compassionate approach, makes all the difference. So there are, again, in this horizontal sector, how do we bring compassion is, we're beginning to learn. There are a lot of organizations like Compassion Institute that is in that kind of, field, trying to apply the principles of compassion that we have learned by training, offering training to the individuals, now trying to bring it more at these key, sectors level, institutions level. Sometimes in Compassion Institute, we call it the keystone professions. So it's sort of at that level. And here, I think, a lot more work needs to be done. And I know David is going to be through the kind of Leeds Festival. There will be various offerings about kind of compassion approach being brought into the school system, into the law enforcement sector, and healthcare. All of this will be available. So I encourage you to really participate on those if those are the areas that you are particularly interested in. So in these key sectors, what is really important is a few things. One is the professional members of these communities themselves need to go through some kind of orientation so that they reorient their basic philosophy of how do they engage in their profession. So that would require some reorientation. The second thing is, in their own community, like in the healthcare context, there needs to evolve a shared language around compassion and shared value around compassion. So that, and this is, I often give the example of school, tiny children who may behave not particularly well at home, but when they go to school, once they enter the school, compound, because they have other small children like them, they know what is the expected norms of behavior. The school children, small children are capable of sensing what is expected of them when they step into the school compound. That's because the power of the shared language and shared norms. So in these key sectors, we need to find a way to develop these shared language, shared values, and shared norms. And so that in a positive way, the peer pressure will be felt as a regulating, force. And third thing is there needs to be a leadership buy-in. If the initiative doesn't have the blessing of the leadership, then it's very difficult to succeed. So that there has to be a leadership that not only endorses it, but actually announces it, compassion as a key stated value of that organization, that community. And that will also put a nice pressure on the leadership themselves to be able to show it. Because compassion is one of those things that it's not enough to be simply talking about it. You have to show it. You have to embody it. You have to live it. So in these ways, there's a real chance that we can improve and change these key sectors. Now, the biggest challenge for us really is, how do we bring compassion in this third domain? This, the leadership, the policy, the societal value, the societal culture, the societal discourse level, that is a difficult one. And, you know, I think but I do feel that although that is the most difficult challenge, but also if we are able to bring compassion in that domain, the impact will be much more enduring. Because now we are talking about changes at the structural level of the societies and institutions themselves. Because a lot of societies, particularly in the West, are right now struggling to understand what are the blind spots and biases that have been embedded in the way in which things were done in the old way. And and that asks us to bring critical self-awareness and also start making structural changes so that those biases can be brought into awareness and dealt with them. So I think if we are able to make structural changes, the benefits will be shared widely so that we don't expect each and every individual person to be going through compassion training, because that is an unrealistic goal. But if we can make the changes at the structural level, let me give two examples that I'm most familiar with, but I don't mean these examples to be an exception. I lived in England for about 10 years. And David mentioned I was at Cambridge, first as a student, and then later I was a fellow there. You know, I have been a great admirer of National Health Service, NHS. Now, the original founders of NHS, whether they actually used compassion explicitly as a key principle, I don't know the history. But we do know that one of the key principles underlying NHS is a compassionate principle, which says that when it comes to access to healthcare, it's a matter of right and it's a matter of needs. It's not a matter of privilege and affordability. And that simple idea of, you know, grounding the access to healthcare based on needs, not on affordability, has made a huge change for people living in the country. And we know just by contrast, how does that differ from the one in the States, where the different principle is at work? That is the power of making changes at the structural level. Similarly, in the province of Quebec, where I live, there is this really great thing. It's about $7 a day daycare. The Quebec as a society is deeply committed to keeping that policy of $7 a day daycare. Now, that simple idea has really made a huge difference, because this means that parents don't have to worry about, you know, their childcare needs and all of this. And so that means parents who wish to go back to work can go back to work and be active contributors to the economy. So you can see the structural change. Now, of course, there must be many other examples. These are the two that comes to my mind as a powerful example of how a simple shift in the policy, a structure, makes a huge difference. So I think the aspirations for this, bringing compassion at the societal level, is everywhere. You know, I would bet if we were to ask citizens across the world, not governments, if we ask citizens across the world, would you like to see your society kinder, you know, and more compassionate and a safer place? I bet over 90% will say yes. That is the aspiration across the world. Doesn't matter where you live. So I think by finding a way to institute compassion as a key principle at the structural, you know, higher level would really make a big difference. And of course, on the specifics here, we will need help from experts on policy making, experts on probably social science to understand collective behavior, incentives. How do we balance compassion with fairness? Okay, how do we balance compassion with accountability? There are many, many detailed issues, compassion and justice. These are specific questions we will need help. But the basic idea seems to be quite sound. And I also believe that if we are serious about transforming society, bringing compassion at in the third domain, is essential. And what gives me hope is a powerful inspiration I see in the example of how the concept of human rights has really changed the world, at least in the liberal democratic parts of the world. This is a post-Second World War idea, the need, the respect for the individual rights, human rights, and the individual autonomy as a grounding of structuring a civilized society has made a huge difference. Now, because of over 50 years of experience, or 70-something years of experience, when it comes to human rights, we now have a rich discourse, a rich language. We have metrics by which we can evaluate whether society is falling short. But the basic idea behind human rights is a powerful one. Because we take it for granted, we fail to recognize the revolutionary nature of it. What the concept of embracing concept of human rights have said is that the collective, the state, there is a boundary around the individual beyond which even the state has no right to cross, unless in very special circumstances. And if the state violates that, the individual can take state to the court and have recourse and make state accountable. This is a revolutionary idea in human history. I mean, never has ever there been in the entire human history where an individual can take the state, but in the old days it's monarchy, and really kind of, argue against this. I believe that it is conceivable and it is desirable, and it should be the case that at some point, compassion, the principle of compassion, can rise to the similar level of the respect for human rights. It will require a lot of thinking of what it means in specific terms. What are the metrics? What is compassion, and how does compassion bringing, and we do have today experience of, for example, when a new policy is adopted, particularly industrial ones, it's become standard, at least in the developed world, to ask the question, what is the environmental impact? We now have a trend. So similarly, when a new policy, particularly economic policy, is being proposed, we could ask the question, how would the economic policy look like if we look at it from the compassionate lens? And a principal, idea behind compassion is the need to pay special attention to the vulnerable. So in Tibetan, there's a phrase called Mela Lakbartsewa, being especially kind to the vulnerable. And this is beautifully captured in Mahatma Gandhi's statement that a measure of any society is found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. So that is a shared idea that what is at the core of compassionate approach. And so it is conceivable, just as today we ask the question, what is the environmental impact of the policy? We can also ask the question by using compassionate lens. So I'm hopeful. It would require a lot of work from partnership of many, many individuals and like-minded people. So I'm really happy that Kinder Leeds movement is, Compassion Institute has the opportunity to partner with you, and many organizations like-minded like us who are really dedicated to envisioning a society that is more compassionate, that is kinder, that is more equitable. In the end, I think those who take compassion seriously need to take seriously the economic inequity in the world. That has to be an important part of that initiative as well. So I actually believe, David mentioned that I spent over 30 years serving His Holiness as his principal interpreter. And one of the key missions that His Holiness has adopted for himself is to promote a more compassionate world. And, whatever I do in this domain, I also see it as a service to my own teacher and try to make his vision a kind of a reality. Thank you all.
Thank you. Jinpa, I think that speech is everything that I hoped for. And thank you so much. You know, the clarity with which you've articulated that philosophical viewpoint, I think, is really significant, because as I said earlier, you know, everybody knows that compassion is a good idea and kindness is a good idea, but it has not so far really gained traction as a really transformational strategic principle. And that is how I see it. And I think I agree. That is the message that I take from everything that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been writing recently. He's done a lot of work outside of his sort of specialized Buddhist teachings, talking about this is a foundation that is necessary for society, especially in the present day when we live in such an interdependent world, where we can no longer afford to neglect, you know, other societies, and the fact that everybody depends on everybody. So it's a fundamentally
Definitely.
important idea. It's not just a nice to have. It's not just a spiritual thing. It's not just for religious people. But we're seeing this. I think it's something quite new. Seeing it in this way as a key idea in sort of political thinking. So a wonderful summary of so many aspects of that idea. So we have about a half an hour now for questions. I'm going to call on Shaid Mahmood to ask the first question. If you do have further questions, please can you put them in the chat to myself, and I will just call on the questioners. I should mention, of course, we are recording this, so that if you don't want to, you know, you're welcome to ask your question with video off, or just to ask me to read it out from the chat if you don't want to appear in the recording. So Shaid, would you like to open the conversation here?
Thanks, David. I could ask about 20 questions, but I'm not going to do that now. I know you'll want to move on to others. You asked me the question, the little tricky one about, you know, what's a compassionate city, and certainly what that means to me. It sounds like certainly from what I took from Jinpa's contribution, that he thinks that compassion is a fundamental and very key value in people. So I suppose my tricky question is, what does it look like when it's not there?
That's a good question. I think when it's not there, basically it manifests in the form of people being very suspicious of each other and not feeling safe, and also feeling alienated, because at the core of compassion is the human connection. And when people feel human connection, I mean, of course, you know, like as any cities, city officials, you know, cannot always do everything people ask. You know, that's unrealistic. But in responding to what is being asked, if you bring compassionate approach, even if the answer is no, if it is done in a way where the person who's asking that question feels he or she has been heard, you know, and it was taken seriously. So I think when there is no compassion, people really feel disconnection, alienation, and also unsafe. And then what happens is, in areas where people don't feel enough compassion, then they tap into the darker side of the human nature. And of course, we all know we are human beings, are very complex creatures. You know, we are not just pure beings. We also have the darker side. So when the darker side is tapped into, then sort of, you know, tribalism, you know, self-focus, resentment, and you know, so all sorts of things come up. So I think adopting a compassion as an explicit value really, in some sense, puts the onus on everybody to bring their better self. So that's the power of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shaid, and thank you, Jinpa. We have a question now from Mubarak Ali. Would you like to ask your question? And can we invite Mubarak to unmute himself? Can someone do that?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, good evening. Namaste to all. I'm Mubarak Ali from India. Thanks for the very insightful session, sir. I feel very compassionate and motivated for this talk. Here in time in India is early morning, sir. It's 12 o'clock. Okay. I feel very compassionate. Okay. I feel very motivated also. My question, sir. Okay. Why compassion is better managerial tactics than toughness? And who is compassionate leader?
That's a really good question. I think what's happened is that in the world over the last few decades, we have, because of the influence of the particular business kind of, culture and school of management and leadership training, there has been a kind of a mythology of how a good leader should be tough and firm. And so the softer skills of people management, relationship building, and recognition, sort of being more inclusive in leadership style, those qualities have been totally ignored. So now I think if you look at some of the new leadership material that is coming from, say, for example, Harvard Business Review, then you now see that the leaders beginning to be recognizing that the ability to regulate one's emotion, becoming more emotionally aware, being able to be empathetic, being able to create a team spirit, all of these are becoming important. So I think there is a cultural shift. And these are what are people now calling soft skills. And so this is where I think compassion is increasingly becoming important characteristics of leader. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, sir. My second question is here. How to foster compassion at work through compassionate leadership?
How to foster compassion at workplace, or?
How to foster compassion at work through compassionate leadership?
Okay. I think the sort of bringing compassion more at the leadership level, particularly at the workplace, one of the most important quality is developing greater self-awareness. If you have greater self-awareness, and that's a challenging one because you need to know your own weaknesses and your own strengths. And also, some people are short-tempered, some people are less, okay? Some people don't get excited immediately. Some people get excited quite easily. So a good leader will know what kind of personality he or she has and will work more specifically. For example, if one has anger management issue, then you pay special attention to finding ways to bring awareness so that you don't lose your temper in an important meeting or an important conversation. So self-awareness is really the first step. And then the second is being able to every now and then connect with your intention. For example, if you walk into an important meeting, before you just jump in, you take a deep breath, you connect with your intention. What is the intention I have here? And how can I, bring this intention in the most effective way? And then the third important quality is to be able to recognize the strengths of others so that people feel that their strengths are being valued and recognized. So those are important. This is part of a new trend in leadership, that the more you are able to do this. And so because in the old days, leaders were tough, the work culture was brutal, and the only compensation and intensive was pay. Okay, now we're living in at a time where particularly the Generation Z and the millennials, they are not going to put up with that old style of leadership. They want to be recognized, respected. They also want to have their own work valued. So in this new environment, I think the old style of leadership doesn't really work. So the leader who is more self-aware, who's able to connect with his or her intention, who's able to recognize the strength of other people, your team, is going to be way more successful.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for insights. My final question, sir. When you have
Without,
failed, how do you respond? My final question, please give me the opportunity, please.
Okay. So what's the final question?
When you have failed, how do you respond?
When do you fail? Okay, this is where it really becomes very important. I mean, this is one area where research in self-compassion is become quite key. When you have adversity like failure, you have to find a way to make sure that this failure doesn't become a way to condemn yourself universally. I am a loser. I cannot do anything. Why would I? What was I thinking, even trying? So you need to find a way to particularize that particular situation and learn important lessons from this so that you are more resilient. So for failure, sort of being able to use the failure as a learning moment is really key. Okay, because otherwise when you fail, a lot of people will either go into the extreme of self-pity and say, oh, I was a loser, I was no good, or they will go to the anger route and blame everybody, saying nobody's fair with me. The world is cruel. So I think here that being able to bring awareness and self-kindness and particularize that incident so that you don't condemn yourself, and then learn from that experience so that next time you do better. Okay. Well, thank you for your dedication. I grew up in India, and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning is quite a commitment.
Okay. Jinpa, we have quite a few questions. I'm wondering if it might be good to take them 3 at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll do that. And Gloria, can you ask your question? Can we ask Gloria to unmute? Can I do that?
Okay. Hello, and thank you. I just kind of wanted to raise this because it's a recent sort of scenario. So we had this situation in the UK in the last couple of weeks where, in theory, well, kind of in theory, there was a fuel supply shortage.
Yes.
But it wasn't. But it was, because it was reported in the news, and then it became a thing. And then everybody went into panic. And then people were, having to fill up their cars immediately. And it was really interesting because I was trying to kind of be very observing what is this, what's really going on, and trying not to jump into that knee-jerk reaction, keep grounded. But I just wondered, what's the best way to manage that, really, because you're seeing everybody kind of freaking out and you're thinking this doesn't make any sense, really, because when you look at something, so that's, I guess my question is how best to kind of manage something like that.
That's a tough one. I mean, I know, for example, like the UK fuel shortage was not so much a question of, a shortage in the supply. It was more the delivery end. And partly it was one of the side effects of Brexit and not thinking through what would that mean with all the lorry drivers and all of this. So there was a complicated situation. But I think the panic buying, this is, again, we human beings are, we like to think we are very evolved. But on the other hand, we're also quite tribal. And when someone behaves in a particular way, particularly driven by fear, the fear is contagious. So people immediately react in that very automatic mode. So, I mean, looking back, people can always be wiser when you turn, when you have a retrospective perspective. But looking back, if the officials, particularly the higher level officials, had been more cognizant of this and then had actually warned about this, because when we know, for example, even when the bad news is coming, if the bad news is staged, our mind gets prepared. When it happens suddenly, we are experiencing shock. And then we immediately turn to this automatic reactive mode. So I think those are important lessons that particularly people in the leadership need to learn, actually, because you cannot ask everybody to, you cannot have a policing work done in regulating every pump, But if there is a way in which it could be done in a staged way, where early warnings come in, but saying that don't panic, it's a matter of, delivery issue, and we will handle the delivery issue. So please don't, do panic buying, because I saw quite a lot of people driving, not just filling their car, but also filling, cans. And it's understandable, because if a lot of people need to, as part of their work, need to drive, it becomes essential, so, need. So it's a complex, but out of that many panic buying, probably 40, 50%, or maybe 60, 70% were unnecessary panic buying. That could have been avoided.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just an interesting scenario, I think. Yeah. And it's back to that, how, as an individual, how you kind of react to that and think, do I buy into this or do I not, because I know what's going on here.
Sure. I mean, we saw that at the beginning of the pandemic with all the disinfectants and toilet papers and all of this. It's a very, very primal human response. When you respond from fear, the scarcity mentality kicks in. It's very human, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have two related questions. So we have a question from Caroline, which she's asked me to read out, and then a one from Josh, is very similar. So Caroline's question says, is a compassionate society possible in a capitalist society? And then I think Josh, can we unmute Josh, and he can ask his question, which is very similar.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Jinpa. Thank you for your address and talk. I'm very interested in systemic solutions. And I notice that the narrative that we live by, especially in the economy, is not so much about care, but about conquest. And so my question is, the basic principle of the market is power, but is there any systemic way we can integrate compassion into business and into the market, so that self-restraint happens in the exercise of power?
Thank you. And that's a really important question. I think finding a way to bring compassionate principle into the very practice of business is going to be crucial, because, and I do personally believe that, creating compassionate society should be in principle compatible with capitalism. And I don't believe that there is an inherent contradiction. The way in which the capitalist market is expressed and practiced currently may have elements of it which is problematic, but in principle, I think the capitalist market policy, economic policy, can go hand in hand with compassion principle. Because, for example, like, part of the current problem now is we have gotten into a way of thinking in the world where every government is judged on the basis of economic growth. And I remember more than 30 years ago, His Holiness was at a small think tank meeting in Germany. And at that meeting, His Holiness made a comment saying that at some point, we need to ask fundamental question about whether perpetual growth-based approach to economic thinking needs to be modified, and whether there is a way in which quality of life, instead of standard of life as judged by economic growth, could factor into modifying this current drive towards excessive consumption. I think this is an important question, still pertinent in our time. But I do believe, for example, like, if you look at Scandinavian societies, they've chosen a system where there's a progressive taxation, which then takes care of the society's responsibility towards the vulnerable, so that there is a basic safety net created for all the citizens. Now, in Anglo-Saxon countries, particularly US and UK, it's more problematic because this market orientation and individual freedom and limited government and all of this rhetoric plays into this idea of, the government shouldn't be interfering in someone's ability to make money. And once the money has been made, it's nobody's business how that money is spent. I think there is that thinking, which is partly true, but also why should society allow certain practices of business where the winners are winning so much and they are losers? For example, like when the globalization took off, which involved, relocating many of the manufacturing facilities outside the, some countries. Clearly, a more compassionate society would have asked the question, how do we then redress the imbalance, economic imbalance this is going to create? And how does the new excessive profits that these companies that are going to outsource for cheap labor are going to, what is their moral responsibility towards addressing that imbalance that is going to come out of it? That question was never raised. And now we have a technological business where Facebook and some of these companies are making a sort of massive amount of profit. It's just unimaginable without having to invest, extensively in human resources and in infrastructure building. So there is nothing inherent in why these kind of practices should be allowed. That has nothing to do with capitalism, core issues of capitalism. The capitalism is about, encouraging market, encouraging competition, so that free exchange of gifts and ideas, both sides will benefit. That's the core of capitalist, instead of state trying to mandate and regulate the economic activity of individuals in a society. So I think there's a lot of serious thinking that needs to be done in the economic domain. And I hope it will happen. And I'm not an economist, I'm just a Buddhist, studies scholar and with some background in philosophy, but I see this and I see the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. We have a number of more interesting questions in the chat, but I'm afraid we are rapidly running out of time. So I would like to just call on Shaid to say one or two final words, and then Jinpa to ask you to just put the capstone on it. Shaid, can we unmute Shaid again?
Hi, thanks, David. What a wonderful session, and I'm sure you've got a list of questions as long as your arm there that perhaps Jinpa might be willing to record the answers to separately, and you could link them in. But anyway, I don't want to put any pressure on the colleagues that do this. First of all, just a massive thank you to everyone that's organised this. I think there's definitely a start of something here. It's great in the way that it feels like the discussions that we've been having around compassion fit with not just what kind of Leeds might want for the way that we seam compassion into the city, but also what the City Council and wider city actors are already doing in that space. And I think there's a real opportunity for a join up there. But one of the key things for me is how being a kinder society, being a kinder Leeds, demonstrating that compassion seeps into the way that we provide leadership for the city. How do we hardwire compassion in the way that we do things in the city, but also how do we make that a part of the training and the development and the encouragement, the coaching and the mentoring of the leaders in the city, so that it is embedded in the way that we do things going forward. And for me, compassion is as much about encouraging employees to talk about their their problems and to provide support for one another, as it is about fostering innovation and creativity. I think compassion plays a part, compassionate leadership can play a part in so many things. And I think thinking about how Kinder Leeds might be able to work with city actors like the police, the NHS, the council and other, the education system and others, to create a cadre of people that have got compassionate leadership as part of their armory in the way that we go about doing things in Leeds would be incredibly powerful. But thank you for inviting me on behalf of Leeds City Council. Great event.
Thank you very much, Shaid. Those are very encouraging words for us to hear. And I think, yeah, there is a really exciting partnership emerging here between Kinder Leeds, Compassion Institute and the city as a whole, not just the City Council. So it's very exciting for me to be part of this conversation and see how this idea is beginning to to get legs. Just one final word, please, from you, Jinpa. Can you just
sure.
Sum up?
Well, thank you, David. I want to remind everybody that compassion is one powerful idea that can unite everyone. That can unite all the religious traditions, members of the religious traditions. That can also bridge the divide between the religious and the secular. Because in the end, if you look at any systems of ethics, the foundation is compassion. And I think this is really important. And particularly those of us who care about the future of liberal democratic capitalist system in the world, I believe that, if the liberal democratic capitalist system is to survive, we have no choice but to find a way to embrace compassion as a key principle in structuring our society so that we can create a kinder and more equitable society in which at least everyone feels that they are being taken care of. So I think compassion is, for me, at least in my mind, a matter of survival of the current system. And also with respect to climate change, if we don't bring compassion as our perspective, then how do you respond to the question, why should I care? I won't be there. That is a cynical question, but it is a question some people ask. And if we don't bring compassion as part of our argument, moral argument, we don't have much, power in our, our rationale. So even from climate, crisis perspective, I think we need to find a way to bring the voice of compassion, the perspective of compassion, as part of our advocacy for the climate crisis as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinpa, Shaid, and everybody. I think this has been an extremely important conversation. And I think maybe your very final words there may be the most important of all. And that's something that I'm very committed to, bringing those two issues together. I've been working on climate issues for more than 15 years in the city. And it's about, about 5 years ago, I realized that it isn't going to work unless we found it on compassion. One of our partners, actually, Voluntary Action Leeds, Richard Jackson, the wonderful chief executive of Voluntary Action Leeds, put it this way: yes, we're facing a climate emergency, but we're also facing a compassion emergency. And unless we tackle the compassion emergency, we cannot tackle the climate emergency. So this is, for me, this is really the heart of the matter. So thank you for bringing that into the picture. And thank you both and everybody for a really inspiring session and a wonderful start to our festival. Thank you. And
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you again soon, all of you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.